Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today I have Smriti Kirubanandan on the line, and this is part of our Milken Global Conference coverage series where we bring you the best of those that attended, the VIPs, the speakers, and the panelists, and all of the above. And Smriti is a technology executive. So first off, Smriti, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Adam. Grateful to be here.
All right, so we got a lot to talk about today. So we're going to get into scaling enterprise AI, what that looks like, maybe some barriers to scaling that, and just some of your experience overall in that industry. But before we do, I want to know about the Milken Conference and your experience. Now, I know you went this year. Have you been before? Is this the first time? Like, what's the connection?
I feel like my relationship with Milken is longer than any other relationships I've had. I've been going there for quite some time, so I think this was probably my fifth or sixth year.
Wow.
But I enjoy, the curation. Obviously, it's very eclectic, and we have leaders across the globe attending them across different industry lines. But been there quite some time, but I was there this year, and that's how we met, and more years to come.
That's awesome. And this is my third or fourth year. I lose track, but I love it. And it's on my calendar every year. It's like, I like to say it's like my Super Bowl of conferences every year. And I just have so much fun. It's like brain candy. Some other people said the Disneyland of conferences for adults and like just for cutting edge ideas. Like, I know why I go back like year after year. What's the draw for you? Like, what keeps you going back year after year?
Great question. I truly think is, the roundup of the people, they have the panels, and then obviously the topics they pick. It's very specific. It's very relevant to what's happening in the year. If you look at other conferences, I will say that sometimes it's not really relevant to what's happening in the market, but obviously this being a global conference, I think it's pretty eclectic and expansive, for someone who desires intellectual stimulation quite a bit. So it's to go back.
Now, I'm curious on I always figure out, do you stay in your niche of an expertise and only go to those panels, or do you pop around? Like, I go to everything. I'm like, I go to some of the media stuff and other things. Okay, that's my industry. I want to see what's going on. But I like going to some, I think this year I went to some longevity thing, a bunch of other different things. What's your process?
Yes, I think that's a great question. I did this time. Generally, I try to stick within my lane of healthcare and tech, but I did, Mark Hyman was there this year, obviously with the longevity and whatnot. But I generally now start hopping around because there's so much that's happening, say, even the VC's world, the PE's world, and the sports and the arts, and everything gets interconnected, especially in the world of AI right now. So I think it's important for me to kind of diversify knowledge and kind of learn, and I think it's the best place to do it.
So speaking of AI, how did this originally come on your radar? Like tech, AI, like where was your career start, and kind of how did it lead to this point to where you're working on and talking about scaling enterprise AI?
Yeah, a little bit of a non-linear, non-typical journey, but my education is based in robotics and public health. So way back then, I started my undergrad in robotics, and people often ask me, why did you pick robotics? But now, fast forward, God knows, 20 plus years later, the dots are connected, right? So when I initially started, it was mostly because...
Interesting how that works, right?
Exactly.
It's interesting. And the only reason I'm pausing there for a second is because for those that are listening, if you don't have it all figured out, it's okay. Sometimes you can only see it after the fact. Like, you think I was going to be a podcaster, Smriti? I didn't even know if that existed when I was in school.
Exactly. To the point, like sometimes you just got to follow your own gut and your own calling, as long as it's...
I love that.
It's for your own good and everyone else's good. That's how I make my decisions. But, when I really started robotics, it was more because I was curious about the psychology of how humans interacted with machines and what they wanted to do. It wasn't really the other side of the coin, which is about tech. But post then, I became very much into natural eating, into wellness, into healthcare. And my career eventually, kind of got into the startup companies of health tech companies, designing the UI, working in, P&L, working in supplement companies, working actually in longevity and mitochondrial function for 4 or 5 years. And eventually I got into the consulting world, which is purely focused on healthcare. But the companies that I worked for and am working for is mostly heavily focused on tech and how does technology truly unlock and really, augment and everything else. But obviously, as we're talking now, I don't think we can go a day without mentioning AI, right?
Yeah.
So long story short, I think my dots got connected. I'm super grateful because they did, and they make sense now, especially since COVID. The only two things we hear is AI and public health, so I think I did those two right. But the conversation always comes down to how do we take something from a 0 to 100, right? Which brings to,
how do we scale? How do we add more value, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Talk to me about some of the challenges you see in trying to accomplish that. And obviously, only so much that we can accomplish in a 20-minute podcast interview, but what are some of the themes that you see kind of crossing over, whether company to company, industry to industry, when it comes to this topic?
Yeah, great question. So I see that many enterprises are facing barriers when advancing AI pilots to production, ranging from structural challenges to cultural resistance, right? My favorite quote is, resistance is more painful than change. So we should always think about that. But with that comes, data readiness is often a hurdle because it's siloed, it's low quality or poorly governed. Data slowly progress. This can be addressed by obviously establishing, centralized governance, standardized pipelines. Whereas obviously skills gaps also play a big role, as technical teams may lack domain knowledge while business units lack AI literacy, something that can be best resolved through obviously cross-functional training, SME partnerships, embedded product managers. Cultural resistance is obviously key. Particular fear of job displacement can stall adoption. Reframing AI as a tool for augmentation, highlighting productivity wins is critical. So I think, when you look at these different puzzle pieces that are kind of, creating this resistance, I think it's truly important to just understand that in order to scale, we need to go slow to go fast. And that comes with truly understanding what is your data blueprint? Are you data ready? Are you ready for your teams to take this on? Are your teams educated, not just bottom up, but top down? And the third one is obviously understanding the impact of what this will do, not just in terms of business outcomes, in terms of ROI, but also in psychological outcomes for your team members and for your company, obviously, and how do you want to scale that responsibly, right? And I think additionally, many pilots fail to scale because they lack clear business value or measurable ROI, because none of this makes sense if you can't measure them. So long story short, I think there needs to be, clear KPI that they can measure against, and there has to be, kind of a hybrid cloud adoption, MLOps practices to standardize deployment, monitoring. All of that needs to kind of come into place in order to truly take it from a 0 to 100.
And going up further, something that you mentioned a moment ago, model ops, I want to go further into governance and platform strategies that ultimately can make something sustainable in the enterprise, because you're right about measuring, you're right about all of that, I agree, but how do you kind of, I don't know if the right word would be ensure, but increase the likelihood of sustainability when it comes to governance in these platform strategies? Yeah,
so obviously, we take a business like a healthcare. Some of the key things you have to be conscious about any industry, but specifically healthcare, is the security of the data, the governance of the data, avoiding any kind of bias, hallucinations. So how do you train those models? Where do you get the data from, the sourcing of the data? How is it cleansed? The entire pipeline has to be clear, transparent, and intentional, because the outcomes matter, right? Those allow us to make decisions. And we talk about model ops. The people listening is obviously model operations, which in simple terms is the discipline of managing machine learning and obviously AI through the entire life cycle, which is the development, the testing to deployment, monitoring, governance, and eventually, the retirement of, whatever the project is. But obviously, bringing in some rigor to that, constantly evaluating, looking at the model accuracy, looking at the bias, looking at the stability in real-world settings, all of that, tied with the transparency, the regulatory challenges across any enterprise, whether it's finance, healthcare, or any other industry like even life sciences, I think it's key. But all of this comes to, I call it a circular loop of just the mechanism of retraining those models, having this data change, but again, becoming more relevant to those models in real time to produce those outcomes is very key. So in simple terms, I think we've got to be very close to the data points and very close to the action of the modeling and the training. And then, I often say this, with great power comes great responsibility. When you produce the outcomes, there has to be, accountability of what those outcomes are, not just in terms of business outcomes, but again, in terms of psychological and any other outcomes that need to be measured, even in terms of environmental.
Smriti, this has been great having you on the show today. I'm curious, and my final question, but what trends or what do you follow? You've been in the space a while. What excites you in this space right now? What kind of trends are you following?
I mean, quite a bit. I feel like by the time we end this call, there's going to be quite a bit more.
I know, but I'm like trying to be a fly in your office right now on the wall. When you wake up, what excites you?
Yeah, it's quite dynamic, right? What excites me is, in terms of research or even in terms of healthcare, the amount of time it's now taken us to predict diseases or to help physician burnout, to just reduce the time and to reduce the cost and, just make things easier. I think it's a boon, right? To me, there's a price for simplicity, and I feel like simplicity is the most expensive thing that we're all going after. So that is exciting to me. And that's not just in terms of healthcare. That's just, even us writing an article, this morning I was talking to my dad. He was like, I put a horoscope into ChatGPT and had some predictions. But there's so much hope and there's so much, closeness and relevance. And because all of this is conversational, it makes us feel closer to data and to what we can have access to. Obviously, the other side of the coin, it has to be done responsibly because end of the time, it's our lives and our decisions and what we're making. So, yeah.
Amazing. Smriti, if somebody is listening to this or watching this, and if they want to follow up and if they want to connect with you or your team, how do they do that?
Great question. They can find me on LinkedIn. Just type in my name, Smriti Kirubanandan, and you should find me there. Send me a DM. Happy to set up a time to chat.
Fantastic. For everybody watching, just so you know, we'll definitely put a link in the show notes so you can just click on the links and go connect with Smriti. And speaking to the audience, if this is your first time with Mission Matters and you haven't done it yet, hit that subscribe or follow button. This is a daily show. Each and every day we're bringing you new content, new ideas, and hopefully new inspiration to help you along the way on your journey as well. So again, hit that subscribe or follow button. And Smriti, thanks again for coming on the show. Look forward to seeing you probably next year at the next Milken Conference. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Adam.